Nietzsche, back in the late 1800s, was very interested in the dissolution of traditional faith in the West. We fell out of our myth. That's a way of thinking about it. We stopped believing in its fundamental axioms. We stopped believing that there was such a thing as a transcendent deity, for example. It didn't mesh well with the emerging scientific viewpoint. And so in the late 1800s, Nietzsche announced the death of God, which sounds fairly presumptuous, but it wasn't something he was celebrating. The full quote, and I haven't got it exactly right, is God's dead, we've killed him, and we'll never find enough water to wash away the rivers of blood. So like that's a lot different than what you see scrawled on bathroom walls, you know. And Nietzsche hypothesized that in the 20th century millions of people would die in the conflicts over what values were going to reign as an alternative to that tradition. And he particularly brilliantly pointed to communism. He said that's where it's going to be, and Dostoevsky did the same thing. And so, and since then there's been this battle, hey? And the battle is kind of like this. The battle is on the one hand between social constructionist utopians who believe that human nature is infinitely malleable and that with the proper transformations in society you can bring about the perfect state and the perfect human being, and traditionalists, and Jung I think is the classic example of this, who believe that there is a human nature and it's deeply embedded within us, and that the cultures we set up have to manifest themselves in accordance with that nature or they will fail. Well, Jung believed in the existence of a meta-narrative, the hero myth, roughly speaking, and he explained its connections to various religious traditions in a staggeringly brilliant manner. Camille Paglia, who I would recommend, and I think I already told you that, you know, she's already concluded after going through a radical feminist period early in her life that the proper way for society to orient itself is within a mythological structure, and that's part of what the humanities provides. And the alternative is rational arguments over what values are going to dominate. And it isn't obvious that rationality can solve that problem. I don't think it can. That's Hume's point. David Hume said you can't derive an ought from an is, right? You cannot use science as a guide to behavior. So what do you use? Instinct manifested in imagination, and the evolved structure of your organic cultures. Something like that. Do they have a structure? That's the question. Okay, so you ask yourself this question. What is it that every human being shares regardless of place and time? So, any universally comprehensive language, that would be a meta-narrative, a myth, a hero myth, let's say. A myth about what a human being not only is like, but should be like. Has to speak to us about those aspects of experience that we all share, because otherwise we wouldn't understand the damn story. Now we go to stories that we understand all the time, like Star Wars, and it really doesn't matter what country. You know, everybody gets it, more or less. So, obviously there's stories that we can understand, and mutually, you know, we understand love stories, we understand stories of conflict, we understand stories of betrayal, we understand stories of anger, and that's because we can feel jealousy, we can feel love, we can feel anger. It's part of you. It's right there. We even know where the circuits are, you know, and then you're like other animals, they feel it too. So, very similar emotions as far as we can tell. So, this is derived in large part from Jung, but not only. Here's what we share: natural world, social world, and the fact of our existence as an individual. And that can be represented different ways. It can be represented as you, the known, and the unknown, or it could be you, culture, and nature, all the same representations. And the cultural representation tends to be male, that's God the Father, let's say, and the representation, the feminine representation, tends to be female. This is the known, the culture, Apollinian control, that's associated with the sun. consciousness, the king, the patriarch, the plow, because it pushes up the earth, the phallus, obviously, order and authority and the crushing weight of tradition, the wise old man and the tyrant, dogma, the day sky, the countryman, the island, the heights, the ancestral spirits, the activity of the dead. Captain Hook, he's a tyrant, and that's why Peter Pan doesn't want to grow up to become him, and that's why Peter Pan doesn't want to grow up at all, because he thinks that adults are all tyrants. Why is Captain Hook a tyrant? Because a crocodile ate his hand, and the crocodile has a clock in its stomach, and the reason for that is that the crocodile is time, and time's already got a piece of Captain Hook, and he's not very happy about it. He's bitter and resentful and tyrannical, and when Peter Pan looks at adulthood, that's what he sees, and he thinks, why should I sacrifice the potential of childhood for the singularity of tyranny? And so he stays immature his entire life, and he's king of the lost boys. Jesus, great. There's a porn star named Jeremy, Christ, I can't remember his name. He's really an ugly guy. He is an ugly guy. He admits it. And he said something funny. I was watching a documentary about him, and he said the funniest thing. He said, I'm the hero to people who think people like me are heroes. Like, what a drag, eh? I mean, he's just in this horrible situation. He doesn't admire the people that admire him, but he gets admired by them all the time. Well, it's sort of like Peter Pan. It's like, well, he's king of the lost boys. He doesn't get Wendy either, right? She grows up. She has a family. He has to content himself with Tinkerbell. And you know what? Tinkerbell doesn't exist. Well, that's what happens when you don't grow up. That's a representation of culture. That's a nasty one, eh? That's a nasty one. Hell will kiss a statue of Stalin. Who cares that he murdered 30 million people? Culture. Well, you know, in the university you hear a lot about the patriarchy and how oppressive it is. It's like, yeah, right, definitely. No kidding. But, you know, it's kind of useful as well, since it provides the light and the heat and the food and all of that, which, you know, kind of counterbalances it to some degree. Culture has a positive element and a negative element. The individual has a positive element and a negative element. Nature has a positive element and a negative element. And if people tell you a one-sided story, which is the ideological story, they leave out that. They say all culture is terrible, the human being is a despoiler, and nature is perfect. It's like, no. Nature kills you. Culture keeps you alive. And there's things about you that are honorable and good, as well as things about you that aren't. And you need to know both of those. And that's what the great stories tell us. All right.